Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I am Brian Heisenbuttle.
And I am Mike Carlson, and this is The View from the U. Brian, Florida State, Notre Dame, a clash of the Titans. Let's talk.
Oh man, game day is going to be one fun place to watch. Number 2 versus number 5. Last time I saw a matchup this good, I'm pretty sure it was the Iron Bowl. But Mike, we got two awesome programs headed by awesome quarterbacks with absolutely stellar defenses coming together. Who are you picking? What do you see?
Well, Brian, it's going to come down to the quarterbacks. It's going to be Everett Golson versus Jameis Winston. These two quarterbacks are two phenomenal quarterbacks. Both were the number 5, ironically. Both were, they're tremendous quarterbacks. Both are Heisman candidates. But it's going to come down to the turnover battle. Everett Golson, he's struggled a little bit of late, with his turnover issue. Jameis Winston, obviously, he's just struggled off the field a lot of late. It's going to come down to whichever quarterback plays the best, because whichever quarterback plays the best, that team is going to play the best, regardless of the other aspects of the game.
Yeah, Mike, I have to say the key to the game is who can consistently put together drives, because we saw when Florida State played NC State was rolling and Florida State could not keep them off the scoreboard. It came to a really tight battle, and Florida State just escaped with that. They won't have that luxury against Notre Dame, especially with a quarterback like Everett Golson.
Exactly, and even Coach Brian Kelly acknowledged it this week. He said, we've become a team with our label being a team of turnovers, and he's like, we have to shed that label as quick as we can. He's like, because we're not going to win any football games that way. So the key is, Brian, it's going to be the turnovers. If Florida State turns the ball over the most, Notre Dame's going to win, and vice versa. So for me personally, I got Notre Dame marching into Tallahassee and winning this one 24-21. Last-minute field goal puts Florida State's title hopes out of reach.
Yeah, Mike, I agree. I'm going to have to go with Notre Dame on this. And we saw even last week against North Carolina how sort of both of these teams have had their defensive struggles, but they've come through in the end. Notre Dame, I've just seen it more consistently, especially with that huge win against Stanford. So I'm going Notre Dame. I'm going to go 30-23. And with that, let's move on. Let's move on to a little highlight action. The Auburn Tigers falling just short to the Mississippi State Bulldogs. Mike, what did you see in this game?
Well, Brian, we obviously thought this one was going to be a little closer than it actually was. Auburn just fumbled this ball, turnovered this ball, intercepted this. They threw this ball game away. They did everything that could have gone wrong. I mean, Nick Marshall didn't play his best. The whole Auburn offense was just stalling throughout the entire game. And, when you give Dak Prescott a couple extra reps, Brian, that's how it's going to be. When you give him more chances to score, Mississippi State is going to convert.
Yeah, and Mike, in our careers as color commentators, we've always pointed out how if you lose the turnover battle, you're going to lose the game, especially when the teams are so evenly matched like these two were. And if on your first 2 offensive plays from scrimmage, you turn the ball over, give Mississippi State an easy chance to jump out to a 14-0 lead really early in the game, there's really no making up for that if you're Auburn.
But if you're Auburn, Brian, the one thing you can't take solace in is that Mississippi State only has, if I believe this is correct, a 13% chance of finishing the season undefeated. They still have to play Alabama and a very good, very scorching hot Ole Miss team. Brian, if you're Auburn, your title hopes aren't done, but they are on life support.
Oh yeah, definitely. I mean, there are a lot of one-loss teams in the SEC right now. Definitely those Mississippi schools are sort of spearheading it. But Mike, we got to move on to revisiting our preseason top 4, our 4 teams in the playoff, and we haven't had the best job predicting.
We're not experts, ladies and gentlemen. And revisiting my picks, I had Notre Dame and Florida State. Obviously, that's going to change with the end of this week. And then I had Oregon and Oklahoma, the 2 schools beginning with O's, and obviously Oregon has just played terrible this year. Mariota, the Pac-12 is just falling apart after what looked to be a very strong USC, UCLA, and Oregon and Stanford squad spearheading that conference. So right now, Brian, I think only one of my picks is going to turn out, if that.
Yeah, definitely. And I also picked some losing teams. I believe I had Stanford, Michigan State, Florida State, which still has a chance, and then, of course, this Alabama team, which has fallen from grace. But, Mike, moving from the sad into further sad, we are out of money here at The View from the U, because we have to, of course, we have had our proud tradition of sending the fruit baskets to each school, which we have cursed with our rising stock, and this last week has been absolutely no different.
It was really bad this week. I think we're definitely in the red right now, Brian, for sure. You got to talk TCU, Georgia Tech, Northwestern. All 3 schools lost this week. All 3 schools we were pretty high on last week. That's our fault. We'll take the hit for that one. Brian, not good so far for us.
Definitely not, especially since all 3 games you saw, this team had a chance to walk ahead and win the game. And they just couldn't pull through. I mean, even Northwestern, they roared back, they tied it, and then immediately they gave up a kickoff return touchdown, and that was the game. I mean, Georgia Tech could never get ahead, could never get in the end zone against Duke, and then TCU just blowing a really late game lead to this Baylor team.
One a TCU defense that played atrocious as well. They couldn't stop a nosebleed, Brian. It was that bad. Obviously, Baylor couldn't do much better, but in a battle of two guys scoring first one to 70 points wins, Baylor obviously won. And if you're TCU, you got to regroup a little bit. You don't play in a tough conference, so maybe you're looking for next year as a chance to claim the national title.
I mean, definitely. If you're looking at from this scenario, the last game we've really seen that had this high of scoring from both teams was maybe the SEC championship last year. And the only way to win that game is if you can continue to have those drives and continue to score points. And TCU's offense absolutely choked. We could expect that they were going to give up some points to Baylor in that fourth quarter, but if they could have just scored a little bit more, gotten those extra yards, gotten that first down, gotten that field goal, and the end of those drives ended up just being punts, then they would have had this game. The deficit would have been too large for Baylor to overcome.
Exactly, Brian, but we got to move on to our second falling stock, Todd Gurley. Just weeks ago, we were like, this guy's going to break the drought of running backs not drafted in the first round. This guy's going to be all-world. This guy's going to be the next great one. Not playing at all. He's done. His season it's a big question mark right now, Brian.
Yeah, definitely. It's so bad to see these guys who were held so high have all these off-the-field issues. I mean, Jameis Winston, perfect example. Everett Golson, perfect example. And unfortunately, Gurley's just going to have to add himself to the list because, this guy had a chance. There were some problems with, his eligibility, problems with the Georgia program, and that's just going to cost him his Heisman campaign.
Exactly. It's going to cost him his Heisman campaign. He might still return to the field. Obviously, Coach Mark Richt tweeted earlier this week that his status is still up in the air, but as for this week, his status is pretty doubtful.
Yeah, so Mike, let's move on. Your favorite conference, the Pac-12 conference, is in a sorry state right now. Some of the teams held so high, Oregon, Stanford, UCLA, USC, even Arizona, just absolutely falling from grace right now.
Not playing well at all, Brian. We thought Oregon, UCLA were for sure locks for at least two of those spots in the national championship Final Four. Obviously, that's not the case. UCLA has really fallen apart. Oregon is on life support right now. USC has just been awful in the fourth quarter. They've been non-existent, giving up Hail Marys and just playing terrible. Brian, it's not good right now.
Absolutely not. When we saw Arizona State lose to UCLA, my first reaction was, all right, just check them off the list. We're sort of narrowing it down to Arizona, USC, UCLA. Those teams will be the ones to make it in. But Arizona State is now actually seeming like the favorite, especially with that improbable win over USC.
Exactly, and if you're the Pac-12, Brian, if you're asking me at this point right now, I don't think we'll see a Pac-12 team in that national Final Four.
Yeah, definitely. So, Mike, let's move into the rising stock. Let's talk about your guy,
Dak Prescott, the coolest name in football, Brian. Prescott played amazing this week. He's the Heisman contender. He's the quarterback of the number one team. If you're Dak Prescott, Brian, your life is pretty good.
Yeah, pretty good. Mississippi State, only the number one seed, only undefeated, only leading the SEC with a good chance to go into that Final Four. But, Mike, the one thing I got to look at for this guy is offensive production late in the game. A lot of the end of the game was because Mississippi State's defense outperformed that Auburn offense. But when he gets into games like Alabama and Ole Miss, which will come later in the season, we can't depend on their offense having as many struggles as the Auburn offense did.
Well, if you're Dak Prescott, you have to step up. If you're going to have to play 4 quarters of football perfectly to beat an Alabama team and an Ole Miss team that are really good, and not to mention an Ole Miss team, Brian, that things are going to be heated. That's a rivalry game. That's a legitimate game if you're Mississippi State where there's going to be some tempers flying. So if you're Dak Prescott, your goal going forward, you have a couple of games, but you need to play 4 quarters of football consistently. But and those blowouts that he's doing, obviously not helping him, giving him any favors in that he's playing 3 quarters and then obviously taking the 4th one off.
All right, Mike, we're running out of time. Let's move on. Let's move on to Baylor and Bryce Petty. Bryce Petty is the captain now. Baylor, absolutely massive win over TCU, which you've already covered. What do you see in this team, Mike?
I think this is a Baylor team that is exactly like the Baylor team of last year. They're going to put up a lot of points. They're going to look good while doing it. They got slick jerseys this year. Bryce Petty's a great quarterback. That back injury earlier in the year was no worry. Bryce Petty right now, number 2 in the Heisman talks. Him and Dak Prescott, scorching hot.
Yeah, definitely. I think the one thing we have to look at is the difference between this Baylor team of this year and this Baylor team of last year is the Big 12. The Big 12 last year, it really had Oklahoma, yeah, Oklahoma State, yeah, and Baylor. Those were pretty much it. I mean, Texas had their struggles. Same with Texas Tech and West Virginia. But this time, the Big 12 is a lot stronger of a conference, and this win looks a whole lot better on the resume, especially with the massive comeback that Petty had.
It definitely does, and I think Bryce Petty right now, Brian, Heisman candidate. So as we're wrapping up our show, we're going to give a couple shout-outs. Who are you shouting out to?
I'm going to shout out hashtag Go Blue, University of Michigan under the lights. Coming out big against Penn State, probably saving Brady Hoke's job. And Mike, the University of Michigan staying undefeated of those home night games at the Big House. I'm loving it right now as a Michigan fan.
Hey, I definitely understand. And hey, maybe if you're Michigan, you play all the games at night, considering how well you played. But Brian, I got to give a shout out. I came today. I decided to wear my Dak Prescott jersey. Oh, that's the wrong. Oh, that's the Flash. Dak Prescott. He's the Flash. He's rising up the ranks. He's the #1 quarterback. He could win the Heisman this year. This guy is so fast, so good. Gotta show some love to the coolest name in football, Dak Prescott.
All right, and on that note, we'll say so long from this week. I'm Brian Heisenbottom.
And I am Mike Carlson.
We'll see you next week.
Call me Katy Perry.